Hey, Jeremy.
So this is the second time we're doing this. Or really, is it like the 10 millionth time we're doing this? We've been talking about rare books.
Oh, good point.
First, we just the second time we've recorded this, but we've been talking about rare books for 25 years. I mean, for me, for you,
27 years. Yeah, and the people in my life who are around me are sick of me talking about books. So
it can be punishing. You're chasing somebody around saying, oh, no, look, there's an issue point I didn't tell you about.
that happens all the time.
Let's get into it.
That's normal dinner conversation. In this episode, we discuss Eleanor Roosevelt's This I Remember, a letter addressed to Jimmy, Einstein, Dancing in the Multiverse, and the filthiest story ever told. Check show notes for links to all the books and letters mentioned in this episode. Most importantly, enjoy.
All right. So another book that I thought was kind of interesting, and I meant to bring up last week when we were talking, but didn't because I don't know. It was a busy week. But anyway, it's a copy of This I Remember by Eleanor Roosevelt, and it sold at Heritage. Did you see that?
I did not see that.
Okay. Here's a link, and it's, you got it?
Okay, I got it. How much did it sell for? I'm not logged in. I just clicked on the link you sent.
Oh, you're not logged in. All right. Well, good. Don't log in. Let's talk about it before you know the price.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
The condition is pretty lousy.
It's terrible. Oh, it's horrible. It's a terrible copy. I can barely look at it.
Yeah. All right, but tell me what it is.
Okay, so it does not state first edition in the descriptions, so we're not going to say anything about first edition. It is printed in 1949.
It doesn't say it's not the first edition.
Doesn't say it's not the first edition, but that's not what this is about. This book was signed by a lot of, kind of significant people. Martin Luther King, Lyndon Johnson, John Glenn, George Marshall, and Roosevelt herself. And I especially like the Martin Luther King, Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson linkage.
Did you say Trigg v. Lee? Sorry.
I forgot to say that.
Yeah, you should have.
Well, I'm probably never going to say that. But, it's cool. I mean, you have these three great figures of the civil rights movement signing the same book.
Yeah, a lot of people did sign this. Actually, the list of names is quite interesting.
It's interesting, right? But, there's one person who didn't sign it, and the fact that they didn't sign it is really flagged. Dean Rusk did not sign this book.
Yeah. Does that make it less valuable to you?
Dean Rusk, I mean, he was...
Wait, what do you mean Dean Rusk? A lot of people didn't sign this book.
A lot. I mean, billions of people did not sign this book, but there's a typed note from the American Embassy in Oslo sending apologies for not being able to obtain a signature from Mr. Dean Rusk.
All right. Well, in fairness, you're making slight fun of Mr. Dean Rusk, but he was Secretary of State under Johnson and Kennedy, so it makes sense he would have been here to sign it.
Yeah.
Although the book is from 1949.
Right.
So these signatures were presumably gotten. Oh gosh, too bad it doesn't have JFK's signature in it.
Yeah. Well, speculation is the signatures were obtained in 1964.
No. If there were a JFK signature in it, it would not.
It would not be a good sign if you had a JFK signature.
So what do you have here? You have a book that's in tatters. You have a page, the first page of the book, that has all these signatures.
Yeah. And can we dwell on MLK, Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson? I mean,
we can dwell on them. But Trigg v. Lee was the first Secretary General of the UN, and I only know that not because I'm a great student of history. It was because my grandfather was losing his mind. He kept calling me Trigg v. Lee. I don't look like him.
That is not true.
That is 100% true. It's been a joke in our family ever since.
Are you serious?
So no, I'm not kidding. So the first time he's mentioned that to him, this was many years ago, and I didn't. Not that a lot of people know who Trigg v. Lee is. I went home and I immediately tried to find a picture of Trigg v. Lee, and I was like, I do not look like this guy at all.
Anyway, let's move on and not dwell on Michael's appearance. But
no, but he also my grandfather also thought that he was about to give a speech for the UN.
That your grandfather was going to give one?
Yeah.
Why would that happen?
He was losing his mind at the end of his life.
Well, okay, so
yeah, but he was happy about it. He wasn't that nervous.
I think you told me at one point that your grandfather invented a game.
He invented a lot of games.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, tons of them. He had one on Canadian TV, a game show.
Wow, that's cool.
But his basement, he had all these games always spread out. That I was the guinea pig in playing them.
Oh boy,
loved it.
Wow. Okay, that's an episode. Let's come back to that.
Yeah. Okay. So the point is, if you pitch this to me without a picture, I would say this is fantastic. This is Eleanor Roosevelt's book. This I Remember, with these incredible signatures all in the book. That's amazing.
But wait a minute, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. because I had that
Signed
same.
by Eleanor herself, don't forget.
I know I had that same reaction initially, and then I kind of cooled off of it a little bit. Can I tell you why?
I think you're going to anyway.
I'm going to, yeah. I mean, okay, so I like having these signatures all in the same place, especially the big three: Roosevelt, Johnson, and Martin Luther King. But there's no real connection between this book and the gathering where these signatures were obtained. So so there's not like
Ooh, that's interesting.
and so organically there's a element of like this the guy who owned the book happened, got himself there, got all these signatures, and then it's like this feat of signature obtaining, as opposed to the signatures obtained and reflect this significant event that link these significant figures, and it's connected to the book. Like, I wish there was more linkage here.
You just did a both sides argument. And you know what?
Yeah.
That's a good argument.
How'd I do?
No, you did well. This is why, and this is a somewhat big area of collecting, and I do not like it. People have signature books, like
Yeah,
signed
I don't
books for
like that either.
places, and they leave me so cold. And like,
Yep.
oh, look, this signed by so and so. It's just signatures. And I'm like, okay, but it's not a certain occasion that I should care about. This is over time. Oh, geez, you know what?
What?
I think you're right. But why did the guy who collected this, Erling Bergendahl, why did he then take such poor care of the book too?
Or did he? So the book is published in 1949. Did he show up in Oslo with this really crappy copy of this book and ask these people to sign it? Or the other possibility is it was in good condition, and then he was like, let's toss in the washing machine.
There's speculation about when it was signed, but he should have written something about that. We're just speculating that these people were in the same place.
Right. But now the thing is,
Or,
early.
actually, Heritage speculates that, well, Dr. King was in Norway in December 1964 to receive the Nobel Prize. Ah, geez, but
Okay, so the guy who
no,
owned the
no,
book.
they're not suggesting it was all at the same time.
Okay.
Would that change? Would that
Well,
change
no,
things if
it
they were
says
signed the same day?
we were able to establish that many of the signers
We're in
were
Norway at some point.
at some point and likely signed during their time
Oh,
there.
that's
Okay, so
that's
King was there in Norway, but no,
nope.
yeah,
They're not
no
there at the
what?
same time. Oh, I
Hmm.
can't believe you ruined this for me.
How did I ruin it for you?
Think about if someone came over and you pulled something off your bookshelf to get excited about. Would this be it?
Right, and these other guys might have been like, well, why am I signing Roosevelt's book? Why am I not signing my own book? And which is,
Maybe. What if you don't have a book?
well, Martin Luther King did.
He did several books.
Anyway, all right, so kind of cool potentially, but
Would it have changed your opinion if Dean Rusk did sign it?
uh, yeah, like it's like you didn't get Dean Rusk. Forget it, man.
That is so weird. There's a letter.
Yeah,
Says
I
that.
know. That's funny. Like,
Makes you start. It makes you start thinking of the billions he didn't sign it. You're right.
I know that I can't stop thinking about the rest. And actually now Kennedy, if Kennedy's signature was in there the way you've read this, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem at all, because he could have obtained these signatures over a long period of time. Now, but the thing is, the guy was not a nobody. He was a noted. I mean, no, if you're noted, he was a
Yeah.
noted Norwegian film director, and Norwegian, films have been kind of something, right? And he worked with the Norwegian resistance movement during World War II. So he was not a loser. He was on the right side of history, and he, as an autograph collector, I think he might have just been a little eccentric.
We're being unkind. This is something. If you collected this yourself, you should be very proud of it. It is. It is. We're actually being unkind, I think,
Yeah,
to Erling Bergendahl. It's just we have an abundance of riches when you go through a sale like this.
that's true. That is very well
So
put.
I think that's the problem here.
Take me to the riches, Michael.
Okay, Jeremy, I think we should leave Oslo and Norway. In fact, the whole 20th century. Let's go all the way back to the 19th century and America, specifically the Battle of Gettysburg. I have something really interesting to show you.
Tell me.
It's a letter about the Battle of Gettysburg. Actually, not a letter about the Battle of Gettysburg. It's a soldier writing about the Battle of Gettysburg. And the Battle of Gettysburg takes place on July 1st to 3rd, 1863. This letter is dated July 13th, 1863.
Wow,
So you're
10
getting,
days. That's crazy.
10 days. Not a lot of time to process what is the Civil War's bloodiest battle, actually the most deadly battle in U.S. history. 50,000 casualties, both sides together in 3 days. Only 3 days.
Okay, so where's this letter selling? Tell us.
This letter is being sold at Fleischer's Auctions, and we have some time here because it's in October.
I like that.
October 12th
Prepare yourself.
for yourself so you can really get into it. And something I have to say about letters in general, like when they're not about famous people, because this letter is from an unknown person. I mean, he knew himself, but that was about it.
Yeah.
It's just a surname Brian, so it could
Hmm.
be anybody.
He's the unknown soldier.
He's the unknown soldier. I mean, it can't be anybody because he was at Gettysburg. And he's a Northern soldier. This is actually, that's all joking aside, this is a really difficult letter to read, and I'm going to do so if I can.
The whole thing?
No, but do you mind?
Do it and read.
Okay.
Read.
This just, again, letters like this. All right, well, I'll get back to that. Okay. Have had some very hard marching and fighting. Was in the Battle of Gettysburg. It's called by the old soldier the worst of the war. I went into action on the 2nd of July on my birthday. We charged on the rebels and drove them out. Quite a number of good we all done very well on the 3rd. It was in 2 charges. We took great many prisoners. The rebels lay killed and wounded as thick as could be. Think about this.
My God.
I was in the sharpest of the fight, but did not get a scratch. It's amazing. There were men killed on all sides of me. Some were killed that lay beside me. I do not see how I escaped unharmed. I went in and have been since told I had done my duty and was no coward. I would sooner be killed than be called a coward. I took 2
Wow.
swords, 1 revolver from the rebels. I have have the revolver on my belt and expect to use it soon. I was on the battlefield soon after the fight. This brace yourself here. The dead and wounded lay very thick, so thick that you had to be careful and not walk on them. It was an awful sight. You could hear nothing but the cries of help from the wounded. But I know that I could not help them, so I did not notice them much.
My God.
You may think me harder hearted, but a soldier must be. I do not want to be cruel to anyone, but as a soldier, I must do my duty and hope by the help of God I may do it. I cannot describe, it was more like a slaughterhouse. I cannot see what there is about a battle, but something that excites the mind. I didn't see that coming.
Wow.
I must say that after the first fire, I do like to go in and give it to them and lead my men forward. You may think me boasting, but I'm not. I'd love your
Wow.
thoughts on this.
I feel like a little bit of a Hemingway vibe there.
It almost sounds fictional.
It does. It does. I mean, that's what I was gonna say. It's like it's a measure of. Do you get a Hemingway vibe there?
Oh, clearly, there's these short, choppy sentences,
Yeah,
and
but I mean, it's
it's a
the other way around. He's, this is so. How do like if you told reading this, if you told me that Ernest Hemingway had spent a considerable amount of time reading Civil War letters, I would be like, that makes sense.
yeah. I would sooner be killed than be called a coward. I would much rather be called a coward.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah.
And I would be because I'd be running the other way.
That's okay. That's okay. So, there's a great book about it's called On Killing in the Civil War. But that is a digression. We're going to cut that out.
No, 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 no. Listen, there's a book that this letter made me immediately think of a book I read years ago called "War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning" by Chris Hedges. I
Yeah,
don't know if you
Chris
ever read that. It was
Hedges.
the part at the end which says, "I do like to go in and give it to them." Here it is. There's something about a battle that excites the mind.
Yeah.
And when I read that book, Chris Hedges, who was a reporter and was on front lines of different wars, putting himself in terrifying situation, was talking about the high and the adrenaline. I wouldn't enjoy terror, but some people kind of translate that terror into excitement in some perverse way. But
Yeah.
I shouldn't judge. I'm not one of them. So this isn't somebody coming up with that idea. This is somebody actually saying it from the heart.
Fundamental reality is a soldier in battle, right? And
Yes,
this letter brings us into that situation.
a source text.
This is an unadorned account. He's not writing for posterity. He's not going to
Yeah,
publish this.
no audience, right?
So I love this kind of thing. It's so incredibly powerful and so raw, and it's like the anonymity of this somebody Brian gives it so much more force because it's not something that is being written for an audience. Except, although I want to say one thing.
Mhm.
Excuse me. As we've been talking about this, I've kind of zoomed in on the letter. I have got to say, I love at the beginning. He just writes, "Friend Jimmy."
Mm.
Like, that's
We
so
all have a
simple.
friend, Jimmy. You know.
Obviously a traumatic experience, and he's just like, "Hey, friend Jimmy," and then he just reports all this stuff.
I mean, he's trying to
I
process this 10 days after the battle.
I know that process is like, this is back to the psychopathology, or whatever. That's probably the wrong word, or I don't even know. But
Keep going with it.
like the humanity of this, you feel like he's just come down off the adrenaline high, and the stress of this battle this has subsided slightly, but he's now kind of like he can verbalize it, make sense of it. But this is only 10 days in. I mean, it's 10 days since the battle, basically, and it's almost like he's now able to put it into words.
When I started at the beginning, 50,000 casualties, most deadly battle, blah, blah, blah. You read that and you go, wow, that's intellectually,
Yeah,
you think that's terrible. But when
yeah,
you read about somebody walking by, dead and wounded, over them, hearing crying and knowing you can do nothing about it, that's a totally different understanding of what's going on than hearing statistics.
yeah. Now, I just want to read you something. This is you may recognize it. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
Oh, yeah, that does sound familiar.
Yeah, it's Gettysburg Address, and so it's what's cool about this to me. If you think about the letter addressed to my friend Jimmy, and then this historic address by Lincoln was what is it? So
4
that's
months later, Lincoln said that. I love it. And guess what? I hope you didn't look. Guess what the starting bid is for something like this?
oh well, now I see it, so I can't guess.
Okay, it's $250.
Yeah,
That's because the market doesn't appreciate anonymous things.
yeah,
Imagine going through your things in your attic and you find this letter.
like a voice from the great beyond. I mean, imagine this is your family member, right? And it's there you are 160 years later, and you find it in the attic or wherever you find it. And you're like, this guy, my, great, 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 whatever, was, this is 10 days after this unbelievably pivotal moment in US history and the history of democracy, period. And they're like this battle. I mean, Lee is invading, basically thinking he's like going to maybe get to Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The
As
North
far
had
north,
it's
yeah,
as far north as they got, right? Can't get that image of him walking through bodies like stacked, it sounds like, wounded as thick as could be, hearing cries for help and walking on because he knows he can't do anything about it.
let me ask you this one.
What?
Any concerns about the condition here? Do you like everything? It's a little faded in spots.
Yeah, but for a war letter,
Right.
and it makes
I
you
agree.
think about what this did to survive to get to this situation. I'm
Yeah.
fine with it. At least, I'm not holding it in my hand, but from the pictures.
Right. And there's nothing like unsightly or, off-putting about it. It's just it is what it is. I like this a lot.
I do too. I almost skipped by it because it just says "Vivid Soldier's Letter." I'm like, okay, whatever. And then I went, let me read this, and then it really blocked all the other thoughts out of my head for the moment.
One thing that Michael, I wanted to ask you about was at the Heritage Sale, there was an Einstein letter. Oh, actually, it was not an Einstein letter. It was a letter to Albert Einstein from this guy, Daniel Lipkin.
I've heard of him.
You've heard of him. Okay.
I've only heard of him really in the context of Einstein letters, though. So that's
Well,
kind of a limited way of hearing about somebody.
yeah. So it was kind of an interesting letter. Lipkin wrote a lengthy letter to Albert Einstein. Basically, Lipkin is laying out his understanding of Einstein's theory of generalized gravitation. And that's, was key in Einstein's work on unified field theory. Lipkin makes some suggestions or considers the possibility of extending Einstein's theory to include hypercomplex numbers. So it's quite esoteric material, obviously, but the main thing is that Einstein is responding in a very genuine, considerate way. And Lipkin had been a student at Princeton, and he had studied under David Bohm.
But not under Einstein?
I don't know anything about Einstein, but he had studied under Bohm. And so he corresponded with Einstein with some frequency, and what Heritage sold, and I'll come to the price in a second, but he corresponded with Einstein with some frequency, and so Heritage sold this letter from Lipkin that he wrote to Einstein. So I want to link you to this letter, unless you saw it.
I did see it. And I have to tell you, my eyes kind of glazed over first because I'm like, a letter from Lipkin to Einstein? And the reason I said I know him from Einstein letters is because I can think of other letters that Einstein wrote to Lipkin that have been on the market. So I guess they corresponded somewhat regularly.
I should add the lot includes a brief type letter signed from Einstein back to Lipkin. So there is an Einstein letter in there, but mainly it's a Lipkin letter that Einstein annotates and sends back to Lipkin. All right, so Michael, here's the link. just I'm going to give you some backstory on this. It sold in 2019 for $6,000 at Christie's. Then in 2021 at RR, it sold again for $26,000. So
Ooh, that
huge,
is some appreciation there.
right? And
Wow.
then it passed twice at Heritage recently. One time this year, and so now it was re-auctioned, and it sold. You want to guess? You know what it sold for?
No, I'm looking at it right now, and it
Okay.
sold for 17,500. So let's recap. It sold for $6,000 at Christie's in 2019. Then sold at RR for 26,000. Did you say?
Yeah.
And then passed twice at Heritage. Once at an estimate of 28 to 42,000, and then again at 25,038. And now it finally sold at 17,500. Kind of in between those other two prices.
I find this letter really cool. I find it really, I don't know, exciting in the sense that it brings you into this relationship between this guy, Daniel Lipkin, who is relatively unknown, but not a nobody, and this figure, Albert Einstein. And kind of one of the things that strikes me about this is the tone with which Lipkin addresses Einstein. Really assertive, confident tone. He's writing to Albert Einstein. And then Einstein doesn't reply like with you know, you horse's ass. He comes back and he engages very seriously and genuinely. And he next to some paragraphs he writes no with an exclamation mark, and next to some paragraphs he writes yes. And so it's
Others, he writes just a question mark, I'm seeing.
yeah. So like, you have Einstein in all these roles, I mean, it's a really complex, remarkable figure. And here we see him in the role of a kind of a tutor, you know, to this guy Daniel Lipkin. And there's something about it that just really I think it's cool. I think it's an interesting angle into Einstein, the person, Einstein as a scholar and just as a decent, genuine human being.
It's more than that. He writes a whole paragraph at the end.
Right. So at the end of Lipkin's letter, Einstein adds additional comments, which are translated on Heritage's website as follows. I can imagine that the metric field could be understood as a hypercomplex number, which appears as a function of another different hypercomplex number. And he goes on from there. So Lipkin was kind of an interesting guy. I read his obituary. He died in 2009. And he was an accomplished guy. He was an engineer. He worked on some of the early computers. A compassionate person. He contributed significantly to the Southern Poverty Law Center. But the other thing is, in his obit, it mentions that he was a big fan of Boogie Woogie.
I mean, I'm not surprised he's a fan of the Boogie Woogie. I'm more surprised that made his obituary.
Oh, now wait a minute. You said the Boogie Woogie, and I said Boogie Woogie, and I want to stop you there because when I first read the obit, to me it was the Boogie Woogie, but then I went back and I saw that there's no the before Boogie Woogie in the obit, and then I was curious. So it turns out, Boogie Woogie is a style of music, but there's also a dance,
Yeah,
the Boogie Woogie,
of course.
right?
Yeah,
So, okay, so this to me is another potentially another dimension to the Einstein Lipkin relationship because very well that that photograph of Einstein where it's a famous photograph of Albert Einstein sticking his tongue out,
of course.
right? Okay? So now we know that Einstein had a zany side,
Absolutely.
right? And a
Yeah.
sense of humor and didn't take himself too seriously. So I'm imagining this hypothetical encounter, and maybe not hypothetical, but I am imagining an encounter where Daniel Lipkin maybe he did meet Einstein. We don't know that he probably did if he was the student of David Bohm and probably a very good student. I would imagine that Bohm would be like, hey, Al, I want you to meet Dan. And, or maybe he says Albert. And Einstein then says, hey, you can call me Al. And so, so, so now you have Einstein, David Bohm, and
And
Dan,
Al.
No, and Dan Lipkin.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and so maybe like Bohm is kind of like trying to break the ice and get his star pupil Dan Lipkin, sort of connected with Albert Einstein and maybe start some correspondence, and maybe Lipkin could write questions to Einstein just like in the letter we see. And so so now go with me. And this is my hypothetical scenario, and I hope it happened. But I can imagine a situation where Einstein, after having said "you can call me Al," that Dan Lipkin then says, "I want to tell you," and they started hanging out, and maybe they go for a walk. They're sort of bonding, and they're connecting, and sort of like you know, and Dan says, "I don't want to, I want to tell you something about myself." And Al says, "What is it, Dan?" And Dan says, I have an infectious smile and a sense of humor, and human rights mean a great deal to me, and I love the boogie woogie,
Or
and I
just
don't,
boogie woogie.
or just boogie woogie. But see, I think I want him to, in that fictional situation, I want him to say, "I love the boogie woogie." And the
Okay.
reason for that is because now I'm imagining him doing a dance, and maybe he and Albert Einstein now like do a little jig or something like that.
I think it's more likely that Albert takes out his violin, and in this case, if he's playing jazz and boogie woogie, I think you call
Ooh,
it a fiddle.
okay.
So he takes out his violin and he starts jamming, and Dan is doing the dancing. I think it's a
So,
perfect scenario,
so
perfectly plausible.
how plausible?
It's the more the more you paint this picture, the more plausible it sounds.
I mean,
But except I'm picturing them as cartoons.
okay, so like we need
We need
like an
an animator.
animator. We need
Yeah,
an animator, right?
exactly. If Einstein loved boogie woogie as well, there's a good chance it wouldn't make his obituary. Just because
Oh my
there are other
god, his
things
obituary
to
would be
say.
jam packed. That's a
Yeah,
great point. It's entirely possible that Einstein said me too.
right. Because it's not in his obituary does not mean
Oh no.
Einstein was not a fan of boogie woogie.
Okay, let's go back to the letter and the price and the auction, whatever. I mean, I don't know, it just caught my eye. I liked the idea of a student, or a student writing to Einstein. I like the idea of Einstein in the role of mentor. And then when I saw this boogie woogie business, I was like, oh god, that's really cool. This whole
That is good
situation,
stuff. It
rich,
makes it come to life,
yeah. And
whether it's
even
true or not.
well, that's the thing. And now, who's the multiverse guy? In some universe, this is true.
Hugh Everett.
Is it? Is it Everett?
We need
I
to
mean, he was
confirm that.
also at Princeton, wasn't he?
Everybody was at Princeton.
They're all at Princeton. So in some universe, this happened. In some universe, Einstein and Lipkin discussed boogie woogie, the the musical genre, and danced the boogie woogie together.
Yeah, Hugh Everett was at Princeton.
Yeah.
He got his PhD from Princeton.
What I mean, around this period, right?
1957 PhD thesis. Well, Einstein died in 55,
No,
but
and
yeah, he
Lipkin was out
worked
of there.
many years. He worked many years on his PhD, Hugh Everett.
Yeah. And Lipkin graduated in 49. So probably not overlap, but I mean, if Everett's right, then I'm right. That they talked about the boogie woogie and boogie woogie.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say you're right.
Yeah. Phew. Glad we discussed this.
Me too.
I saw this letter from a French dealer by the Marquis de Sade. Have you ever heard of that guy?
Ooh, he's a very controversial figure.
Very controversial. And, known for misogyny, abuse, sexual abuse, violence, but also a major literary figure, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people collect him. There's some fascination with him.
Right. So the letter we will link to in the show notes is offered for sale for 5,500 euros. Has just been imprisoned for what will be the last time. And he's gone into prison, and he's not coming out.
Wow.
Okay, so and now one of the ways he gets into prison the first time he goes in is because his mother-in-law reported him to the king, and then the king scooped him up and tossed him in jail.
That's-
Your mother-in-law
yeah,
out you,
he's not getting along with his mother-in-law after that, I don't think.
right? But I
I
mean,
wonder what his wife thought of that. Were they still married?
that I don't know. This is just total skimming here. But the point is, in the letter, the Marquis is going on about how awful it is to be imprisoned. He writes, this is a translation, but it says, I experience spasms, a sort of shivering, a lot of yawning, disgust, total despondency. The blood rushes violently to my head. Then I feel dizzy, spinning, which makes me stumble, and 1,000 other things, proving a great tension in the body. and a great irritation in the nervous system. So he's like, really suffering here. But it's kind of like this irony because he's this master of suffering. I mean, we have sadism because of him, and so
You're
here he
saying
is.
he might be enjoying writing this letter or
I don't know.
documenting his symptoms.
That's what I want to know. I'm asking you. What do you when you read?
I actually didn't think of it that way.
How do you think of it?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't.
I've read it like a normal person writing the letter, but that's not
Yeah.
what it sounds like now.
Well, I don't put it this way. I don't. What is the amount of like literariness in this description? You know what I mean? It's such a unique thing to have the Marquis de Sade. Like he, without him, we would not have the concept of sadism. We would have some other concept.
Or it would be
But
sadism, but a different name.
he might have been that influential. You don't know. He may have invented
Could be like
sadism.
Bobism,
Yeah,
Brianism.
Brianism.
Could be anything.
Sounds like aneurysm.
It could be aneurysm.
There's nothing funny about an aneurysm either.
No,
That's
it's
the
nothing.
thing. That should be
Stop
emphasized.
laughing.
Yeah, but my point is, I don't really know how to read this from Marquis de Sade. Like and it seems like he's writing to his wife.
Well, that's what I was about to ask. Is it performative? Is he speaking from the heart?
I don't know
What's
how would
going
you
on?
ever know with him?
You wouldn't.
He wrote the most impure tale ever told. I mean, that's what they say.
That is that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, but you shouldn't make light of it. He was famous for the little girls affair, and this is what his mother-in-law outed him for, which I mean, he's a repulsive human being apparently.
Hey, did you ever see the music? Did you ever see the movie The Aristocrats?
No, I'm not.
Oh, so okay. Do you know the joke, The Aristocrats?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is like a template for comedians to express their filthy minds. Is the joke?
Yeah.
I bet he'd be good at it.
Oh God, yeah. But I mean,
So my argument is that someone who does a really good job with The Aristocrats would beat the Marquis de Sade in the filthiest tale ever told.
Well, I was kind of interested in the question of like this.
I want to say The Aristocats. Is that something else?
I don't know.
Children's movie.
120 Days of Sodom is a Penguin classic.
Wow, I believe the scroll, the actual manuscript scroll to that, was bought by the French government for a lot of money a couple years ago.
A lot of money, millions of dollars. Yeah,
because they saw it as a national treasure.
Yeah,
think about that.
I know.
But that's not the filthiest tale ever told. What's the filthiest tale ever told?
I don't know.
Is it that?
It might be, but I mean, now with the internet as it is now, I mean, I don't know.
That's a good point.
It's a cesspool. I also kind of got interested in material by Marquis de Sade in the book market. So I want to read to you something that I just love, right?
Okay.
All right, so this is an auction record from 2020. A copy of Justine sold at Christie's for 37,500 euro. And at the head of the first volume, this is kind of the Christie's description, there was a note written by a previous owner, okay? Can I read you this note?
Please.
It's fascinating, marvelous little note. It goes, okay, this is Christie's description. They say, the copy also includes a delicious note at the head of the first volume. And it reads, horrible novel composed by the execrable Marquis de Sade in the dungeon of Vincennes. Everything that the most delirious, most obscene, and most bloodthirsty imagination can dream of as more monstrous and more revolting seems to have been brought together in this work, the very conception of which must be considered an attack on the social order. And then he goes on, the book collector goes on. So this is a book collector writing this. He frightened the men of 93, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. He was the terror of Bonaparte. And then at the end, he writes, I acquired this abominable book on July 4th, 1842, so that it would be out of circulation.
And then I read every word of it so I can make in my opinion and loved it. I'm sorry, I didn't love it.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like he was so fascinated with it. I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of that he just said 5 stars.
Right. I mean, like, but he's a philanthropist. It's like not book burning, but it's taking it out of circulation. But then you're definitely getting credit for that. You're saying like, I'm going to get some credit for this.
Yeah, he didn't take that copy out of circulation because it still exists.
I think we're done with Marquis de Sade.
We're done with the Marquis de Sade. It's something distasteful. Although I've never read any Marquis de Sade books, so I'm just,
You're just being a prude. A moralistic prude, or are you just being a normal human being?
I'll let you decide that.
I don't even know.
I don't even know. I'd have to think about that too much.
Honestly, I don't even care. I'm not that interested in that question. Am I?
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe I am.
Now let's move on.
All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe. Find us on social media for information about upcoming episodes. And until next time, so long.